All right, can you hear me? I can hear me. Okay, hello. I had this great spiel where I was going to learn enough Hungarian to introduce myself to you in Hungarian. And then I tried to learn Hungarian, and I decided that it would be better not to start this talk by embarrassing myself. So I'll stick to what I know. Hello, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you all so much for being here. This conference has been blowing my mind for the last 36 hours or so. Every single talk that I have attended has been incredible. I've been going home at night and watching the streams online too and seeing the talks that I missed. Multi-track conferences are so hard because if there's 6 tracks, I want to go to 5 of those talks, but then I'm actually giving the 6th one, so I have to be here. So I really appreciate you guys for choosing to spend some time with me to talk about feedback. I'm actually, again, a little mind blown to see a room this big, this full of people who want to hear about this topic. It makes me really, really, really happy. So thank you so much for being here. So this is me. I'm Erika. I am EA Carlson anywhere on the internet that matters. My Twitter handle will be on my slides throughout, so if you want to tweet at me, tweet feedback to me. I'd love to hear it. I am a software developer. I started out as a back-end Java engineer, so I've done a lot of Java, which I really love. I've done a lot of JavaScript, which I really don't. And most recently, I've been an iOS developer. I work at a wonderful, magical little company called Detroit Labs in Detroit, Michigan, so I came a long way to talk to you today. Detroit Labs is a mobile consultancy. We build primarily iOS and Android applications for our clients. We also have my favorite thing in the world, our developer apprenticeship program, and that is now my job after a couple of years of being a mobile developer. I train and coach software developers. So what happened to create this program? A couple of years ago, we were having a really hard time hiring enough mobile developers. Michigan is cold. It's really cold. It's cold for 9 months out of the year, and then it's really beautiful for 3, and then it's cold again. And it gets cold so fast you forget that it was ever warm. And so it turns out mobile developers can get paid a lot of money to go work somewhere where it's not winter for 9 months out of the year. So we were having a hard time hiring enough people. Teaching and learning is a huge part of our culture as a company. We spend a lot of time doing lunch and learns, doing internal presentations, doing meetups, pair programming, working together, figuring out ways to learn things and share them with each other. And so one of our co-founders had the idea, what if we create a program to train people who have no prior development skills and turn them into software developers? And what if we could do that in 3 months? The first time he said that, I laughed and said, okay, really funny. But we gave it a try. And it was magical. We hired the majority of that first class of 10 that we brought in through our 3-month program. We did another class in the fall of 12. We hired all of them. Today, 30% of our development team is apprentice graduates from our own program that we trained. These are people that come in with no prior experience. They have curiosity, they have grit, they have determination, they love to learn. They have all the other things we look for, and then we teach them the skills. And running that program, which is what I do now, is a big part of the reason that I'm here today. Because teaching involves so very much feedback. It involves giving feedback constantly and receiving feedback constantly and having to get really good at both of those things. So, here's a quick outline for my talk. Here's what we're going to go over today. First up, really simply, we're going to establish a shared definition of what feedback means in the context of this talk. I think it's important that we're all on the same page. The whole premise of my talk, the whole reason we're here, is that I think feedback is really, really important. So I'm going to talk about why I think that is. Once we can agree that feedback, yes, is very important, we're going to move on to why most teams struggle with giving and receiving feedback, and most teams do struggle. Once we've agreed on that, we'll talk about how we get better. That's the biggest part of my talk, is all these ways we can get better at giving and receiving feedback. And this last piece that I'm going to cover before I jump in is, how do I know? What qualifies me to be up here, standing here, talking to you about feedback? I have a background in psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but that informs what I do and the way that I work. I have a decade of experience as an orchestral and chamber musician, which seems really kind of out there for a developer conference, but let me tell you how much feedback you give and receive as a musician working with other musicians. I have prior professional training in communication and mediation. I used to help mediate for people who were in the process of getting divorced. Let me tell you how much fun that is. I currently work in a flat organization. We have 100 people and no managers. We have no choice but to talk to each other when we have problems that we need to solve. And I have coached and mentored over the last 3 years dozens of individuals and teams, probably 100 or so junior developers in the last few years, and teams. And a huge part of that always ends up being teaching people how to give and receive feedback better. I've learned about feedback from all of those contexts. And this is a talk about what I've learned. I don't claim to be, the last word on any of this or to be the world's foremost expert or anything like that. I've had a chance to learn a lot in a lot of different situations, and I want to share some of that with you today. So, I'm going to suggest that you do what I do with feedback and take what you find useful and leave the rest. All right, first up, really quick. In this talk, I'm going to refer to feedback as this, a response to a person's behavior or performance that we share with that person for the purpose of increasing their awareness, of broadening their vision, and possibly of shaping their behavior so they do something differently the next time or so that they keep doing that same thing. Feedback helps us understand our words and actions in the context of other people. How you see yourself is really important, of course it is. But how other people see you is the major determinant in the entire trajectory of your career. How other people see you determines if you get a raise, or get promoted, or lead a team, or talk on stage at a conference. All of that is about what people see when they look at you. And you can learn what people see when they look at you by getting feedback from those people. There's 3 types of feedback, and I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. First up is affirmative feedback. This is also referred to as positive feedback. I love positive feedback, and I feel like it gets lost in the shuffle a lot. We tend to think about feedback as always being negative or constructive or for growth or telling us things we should change. But positive feedback is so, so, so important. Positive feedback reinforces behavior. It increases the likelihood that that person will do that thing again in the future. So if someone on your team does something you love, let them know. They're likely to keep doing it. Then we've got constructive feedback. Constructive feedback is what everybody thinks about when they hear the word feedback. And constructive feedback says, hey, don't do that thing, or do that thing differently. It reshapes behavior or prevents us from repeating that behavior again in the future. The last type of feedback that I have up here is passive feedback. I'm not really going to talk about this a lot, but I want to acknowledge that it exists because the fact that it exists outlines why the first 2 are so important. Passive feedback is what happens when you don't do anything. Not doing anything is feedback too. If somebody on your team is awesome and you never tell them how awesome they are, or that they do this thing, that thing, and the other thing so well, you're devaluing that behavior. You're saying, that's not so important that I noticed it enough to call it out. If somebody on your team is doing a jerk thing, I like to assume most people aren't actually jerks at heart, but we all do jerk things sometimes. If you ignore that behavior, you're condoning it. You're saying, that's fine. You can interrupt your teammate in meetings. You can talk over somebody. You can make really mean comments on somebody's pull request, and we're not going to call that out because we don't care that much. That's fine. So passive feedback is feedback too. Silence and inaction are both forms of feedback. Again, we're going to focus on the first 2 types in this talk because actively engaging in them will help you minimize your passive feedback. When I started teaching programming, I taught programming the way that I learned it, which was I did lesson plans, and I made lectures, and I had slides, and I had concepts on slides, and I constantly got this question from people who were brand new. Why does it matter? Why do I care about an if statement? Why do I care about a for loop? What does it mean? Explain it to me in the real world. So now, all of my lectures after each concept include this slide, why does it matter? And today this matters because feedback is one of the most awesome and effective tools you have available to you to improve your team's performance and your own performance. If it's done well, and the caveat here is that you only get these benefits if feedback is done well, feedback can improve communication. It builds trust. It helps teammates collaborate more effectively. It speeds up your problem solving. You get more done in less time. Feedback helps teams solve problems early. And problems that are not solved early become toxic. Most problems that you have in your team are mosquito problems. Somebody pops by your desk 15 times a day, and every time you're interrupted, and you have to kind of stop and change context and go back to work, and that's annoying. That's what I call a mosquito problem. It's really annoying, and it kind of like nips at you. It's not ultimately going to hurt you or ruin your day, but it doesn't feel great. The thing about mosquito problems is this. Think about one mosquito bite. Kind of itchy, kind of annoying, but like not the worst thing in your life, right? What if you were covered in like 600 mosquito bites? Sounds horrible, right? Right. So mosquito problems, if they don't get addressed, turn into monster problems, turn into problems that do derail teams, that cause people to leave, that cause people to become resentful. So feedback prevents mosquito problems from becoming monster problems. One of the teams I coached had 22 people on it, which was an adventure to begin with. And they had reached a point in their team where they couldn't talk to each other about anything. Everything would devolve into an argument almost within, the first couple of sentences. And so they actually reached out externally to the team and said, hey, we need some mediation. We need some help. We need to get ourselves back on track, and we are not capable of doing it ourselves. And so a colleague of mine and I went and did a whole day workshop for this team to try to get them back on a good track. Most of what we did that day was listen. And as I listened, every problem they brought up, every issue they mentioned, everything that they kept kind of coming back to and saying, well, this is just, we don't know how to get past this. I would think to myself, if that had been addressed the first time, or the third time, or even the 17th time, we wouldn't be here today. So feedback prevents us from getting to that point. If we want to do our best work, I would argue that good feedback structures aren't optional. I would say that they're essential. So now, why is it hard? This is pretty straightforward. Teams struggle with feedback because people struggle with feedback. Feedback is so hard, and we don't ever acknowledge that. But giving and receiving feedback are both difficult skills, and they are skills that most of us don't get a chance to practice or don't have the resources to develop. It's a big part of the reason why this talk was written. I asked a room full of developers, what do you think when you hear the word feedback? What's the first word that comes to mind? And I wrote down all the responses on a bulletin board. And I got responses like anxiety, defensive, nervous, not good enough. My favorite word, terrified. I say feedback and they say terrified. Feedback is hard. It's scary. I know that feedback is hard because nearly every person I've ever asked, and I ask most people, will say that it is hard for them. I know because it's hard for me, and I have professional training in communication and feedback and a job that requires giving and receiving feedback on a multiple times a day basis, and it is still hard and scary for me too. Look at that list and that last bullet point there. I think that giving and receiving feedback effectively takes all of those things. It takes openness, maturity, self-awareness, courage, vulnerability, confidence, and trust. Those things are hard to do sometimes with the people that we love the most, let alone with our colleagues. I have problems with those in relationships with people that I've known my entire life, let alone my coworkers, right? Those are hard things. They take practice. We don't just inherently get good at those things. The word fearless is in my talk title. And I believe that information and tools are the best thing to help us overcome fears. So this talk is packed full of information and strategies. But before I jump into those, I want to talk a little bit about fear. Growth is part of our job as developers, right? We have to grow. We have to learn. That's why we're here at this conference. We're like sharks. If we don't move forward, we die. We have to grow. And fears are great for growth because a fear is like this awesome package wrapped up and handed to you saying, here is the best way for you to grow. Here is the area that you most need to grow in. You look at what you're scared of and you will see where you need to grow. I had a project manager once. She'd come into a meeting and she would never say, we have a problem. She would say, we have an opportunity. And I would roll my eyes all the way around. Just be like, it's a problem, okay? Like, we can say that it's a problem, it's fine. But it stuck with me. And now I see fears as opportunities for growth. That's not to say they aren't real and scary. They absolutely are. But they aren't unchangeable. I gave my first technical talk 6 years ago. I was so nervous that I did 3 shots of tequila beforehand. Let me tell you what a good idea that was. It was a mess, as you might expect, and it is still on YouTube somewhere. And I quit. I walked out of there and I went, I am never, ever doing that again. That was a terrible idea. I'm just too scared. I'm not a person who can get on stage and talk to people about things. So I'm going to write that off. That's a thing that I am too afraid to do, and it's not who I am. I made that fear part of me, and I kept it as part of me for years. 2 years ago, I had 2 big fears. Still that public speaking thing. Number 2, I was afraid to fly. Well, here I am in Budapest in front of all of you lovely people, right? So something happened in the interim. And what happened was this. I thought, what could I gain if I was willing to overcome those fears? If I was willing to look at those fears and say, those are not part of who I am, those are things that I can change. And what I gained was 2 years of getting to travel the world and 2 years of getting to meet amazing people at conferences and getting to learn and getting to grow and getting to share what I've learned. And it has been absolutely magical, and I wouldn't undo it for the world, but I was so scared. I was scared 10 minutes ago standing offside the stage waiting to come up here and talk to you. I'm still a little bit scared, but less so with each passing minute. So, I encourage you to look at the fear of giving and receiving feedback, because most of us have fears around that, as an opportunity. When you're in a situation like this, let's say your boss says, hey, I have some feedback for you. Can we meet tomorrow? Most of us panic, right? Like, I panic. Everybody that I know panics. The number of times people will just like slack me and be like, oh my God, he wants to meet with me. I'm probably fired, even though that person is like the top performer on their team. Like, nobody's immune to this. So I encourage people to ask themselves these questions when you feel anxiety about giving or receiving feedback. What are you scared of? Well, you're scared to give the feedback or you're scared to receive it. Sure. What's the underlying fear? I'm scared I'm going to get fired. I'm scared the person I'm giving feedback to won't like me anymore. I'm scared they will retaliate against me. I'm scared the feedback will affect me and make me realize that I'm not as great as I think that I am. Find that underlying fear. Find what you're really scared of. Then, what can you do about it? What steps can you take to overcome that fear? And what could you gain? What could you get by moving beyond that fear? The reason we don't like to give or receive feedback almost always comes down to fear. It comes down to fear of being judged, being disliked, being fired, or even just being seen. I know people that are terrified to get positive feedback. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay? So, like I said, I think that the best defense against fear is tools, is strategies. So I'm going to give you some of those. But first, if you take nothing else from this talk, I would love for you to take this slide. This is my 101. These are things that I think are so important to everything else that I'm going to say. Good feedback is specific, and you can find eons of research about this. Feedback is only effective when it is specific. Good feedback is thoughtful. You want to be kind in your delivery. That doesn't mean be indirect. It doesn't mean dance around the subject. It doesn't mean like do the compliment sandwich. Don't do the compliment sandwich. But you can still be kind. You can be direct and be kind. And finally, you should be direct. Don't modify your feedback. Don't minimize it. Don't say, well, it's not really such a big deal, but you didn't let anybody else talk in that meeting, but you're really a great person, so it's fine. Don't do that. That's not direct. So, simply say what you mean, and then stop. The structure of effective feedback looks like this. This is not mine. This is a very popular model. The structure goes situation, behavior, impact. When you give feedback to somebody, you say, in this situation, when you did this specific thing, the outcome was that. And I have a couple of examples up here. You'll note they're both structured this same way. We call to mind a situation. We talk in terms of facts. We say only what happened. You don't want to say something like, when you disrespected me in that meeting the other day, because disrespect is not objective, it's subjective. That person may not have thought they were disrespecting you at all. So you have to name a specific action, behavior, or even a direct quote. And then you say the impact. Ideally, the impact is on you. You don't want to speak for other people. It's not generally super effective to say to somebody, when you did this, the team was really upset. Talk about you. Talk about how you felt. Remember that whole vulnerability and openness thing? That's where this comes in. All right, with that, strategy number 1. This is about receiving feedback. And I'm going to start with receiving because I don't think people think about receiving feedback as a skill, and it absolutely is. And here's the first step to doing it well. When you receive feedback, listen intentionally. Almost none of us do this anymore. We listen to respond. When we're in a conversation with somebody, and I catch myself doing this all the time, I'm kind of paying attention to what they're saying, but I'm really just waiting for my turn to talk again. So when you're receiving feedback, don't do that. Just listen to listen. Pay attention to your body language. Most of us have probably seen, there's this pie chart that says communication is like so much tone and so much what you say and so much body language, and it's like a massive amount is body language. If you're talking to me and you're saying, hey, Erika, I really thought your talk was okay, but you could do this and that and better, I'm going, yeah, okay, whatever, and I'm not meeting your eyes, and I'm folding my arms, I'm closing my body off, I'm looking away from you. Do you feel like I'm engaged with your feedback? No, you don't. Of course not. But if you say to me, hey, Erika, I thought your talk was good, but here's a couple of things that I might do differently, and some thoughts that I had from sitting out in the audience, and I'm looking and going, okay, great, thank you. I'm looking at you. I'm listening to you. I'm nodding my head. I'm verbalizing affirmation as to what you're saying. My body language is telling you, I care about what you're telling me right now. That should be your body language when you receive feedback, even if you hate it, even if you think they're totally wrong, even if you think they could have delivered that feedback a lot more sensitively. Approach it this way. I generally don't think you should say anything in response to feedback except for one thing, which is on the next slide. But if you're going to say something, make it this. Confirm your understanding. So I'm going to say to you, okay, what I'm hearing you say is that you think that my talk would be more engaging if I didn't read directly from my notes and if I focused on making more eye contact. And you might say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Or you might say, no, I think you misunderstood. Here's what I was trying to say. So the only response you should give is to clarify the feedback that you are receiving. Make sure you really understand what that person is trying to communicate. And then you do this. You do the hardest thing in the entire world. You say thank you and you shut up. You stop. That is all that you say. We'll start with the easy one. Somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, you killed it in that meeting. Like, your preparation was great and you really had the client like super engaged and it was so good for all these reasons. And you go, oh my God, no, I said this dumb thing and I did that and then that was stupid and honestly, no, and so wrote the presentation, it wasn't even me. Don't do that. Don't do that. We all do that, by the way. This is deceptively difficult. But think about what you do when somebody gives you a compliment. Even if you come up to me after this talk and tell me that you liked it, I will try really hard to just say thank you. But there is totally a chance that I'll say something like, oh, I was so nervous. I wish I would have been calmer. I wish I would have talked slower. I wish I would have remembered to keep my lower body still, because that's what like speaking 101. I might say that, even though I know that's not the right thing. So, accept positive feedback graciously. Don't deny it. Don't minimize it. Just say thank you. And think about what your tendencies are. Do you get embarrassed when somebody compliments you? Do you shrug it off? Do you push back? Do you explain why you're not really so great? Do you refuse to take credit that you deserve? Do you minimize your accomplishments? And do you think any of those things are serving you and advancing your career? Step 2. We thought that first one was hard. This one's a monster. Accept constructive feedback. So when somebody comes to you and says, you did this wrong, or partly wrong, you should do it differently next time. That is the hardest thing in the world to hear. No matter how detached you may think you are, no matter how comfortable you feel in your own skin, being told, hey, I thought that was not so great what you said or did, and you should do something different next time, hurts. It hurts and it makes us feel defensive. And we want to strike back and we want to say, no, you misunderstood me. Or worse, we want to make the other person wrong as fast as we possibly can. Don't do that. Don't argue. Don't push back. And even if you feel defensive, don't project that. Just say, thank you for the feedback. Saying that is hard, meaning it is even harder. I'm even going to go out on a limb here and say for the first couple times, you don't even have to mean it. Just try to look like you mean it. Just practice. Just get used to this response of thank you for the feedback. When we feel emotional, we tend to react. We don't respond. We react from instinct. We don't respond from thoughtfulness. So what this does right here is it holds in your reaction, because your first reaction is probably not right or productive. So here's a response, say the response, and stop. Next, you can respond. You just have to do it a little bit later down the road. Let's imagine you have just had a performance review with your manager and it did not go the way that you hoped. So you're not like going to get fired or anything like that, but your boss has said, okay, you've got to improve in this area, that area, and this area before we can give you a raise or promote you. Sorry. And you manage to accept the feedback thoughtfully. You say, thank you for the feedback. And you walk away and you are halfway to your desk and you freak out. And you think, she didn't understand where I was coming from at all. She totally misrepresented that. She doesn't have all the facts. I bet so-and-so is talking to her behind my back. I don't even think my boss ever really liked me anyway, and she's probably just trying to make me quit so that she can hire somebody she likes better. And you have had all of this little drama in your head by the time you sit back down at your desk. Do you see why I say don't respond in the moment? Go home. Go home. Have your feelings. Cry about it if you have to. Sometimes I have to. And let yourself feel your emotions. Feelings want to be felt. They come, and then they go. And then you are in a place of clarity. Then you are somewhere where you can actually deal with the feedback that you received. Feelings are hard. Identifying what we're feeling is deceptively challenging. So just try to finish that sentence when you receive feedback that's hard to hear. I feel blank. Angry is usually a good starting place. Most people feel some level of angry, frustrated, something in there. defensive, hurt, vulnerable, scared, nervous, upset. Whatever it is, find a feeling word and stick it in there until you find the right one. And then sit until those feelings go, and they will. I can be furious about feedback that I've received and feel like it's unfair and I've been misjudged and all of this stuff. But if I give it a day or two, those feelings have usually faded, and I can see the feedback for what it is. At that point, you decide what to do. You ask yourself, is there value in that feedback? Usually when things hurt us and make us respond, there's something to them. So what do you want to address, if anything? Do you need to change your behavior? And how are you going to do that? And sometimes there may not be anything. Sometimes the feedback you get from another person may be about them and not about you at all. You will learn to recognize that if you give yourself space to do it. At the beginning of this talk, I said, take what's useful to you and leave the rest. That's my strategy for feedback too. Step 4, assume the best. This is something that we work at really hard at our organization because, again, we are flat, and so we do a lot of giving and receiving feedback. And that works if we assume that the other people around us want the best for us and want our growth. When somebody gives me positive feedback, what I should think to myself is, wow, this person is taking the time to compliment my work. That's great, and I should look them in the eye, smile, say thank you, and appreciate that. When somebody gives me constructive feedback, that person took the time to think about how I could improve, how I could grow, and then sat down and shared that with me, even though I know giving constructive feedback is really hard. That's fantastic. If I assume that person comes from a place of positive intentions, when I say thank you for the feedback, I'm thanking them for that positive intent. This is another phrase from a project manager, a different one. She'd always say, feedback is a gift. And I would go, oh God, now like what's coming down the pipeline, right? She was right. It is. It's a gift for the purpose of helping you grow. Even if it feels like a really crappy gift sometimes, it is always something. I covered this a little bit already, but it's got its own slide because it is that important. Again, if you dig into the research on feedback, almost all of it mentions specificity. Whatever kind of feedback you're giving, whether it is affirmative, positive, or constructive, it should be specific. Name actions, name behaviors, quote directly, say to a person, when you said this, it hurt my feelings. Look at my examples up here of generic versus specific feedback. It doesn't hurt for somebody to say to me, hey, you did a good job. I appreciate that, that's great. But it doesn't help me really. This second example helps me a lot. It tells me what I did right. It tells me what things resonated with my audience. It tells me what things I should do again. It tells me what's important and how I engage people. That's really valuable. Think about the most important message you want the person to take from the feedback session. And focus on that. Maybe write it down before you actually sit down and give the feedback. And get as specific about it as you can. I say here, don't try to do too much. Assuming that you're not dealing with dangerous or seriously destructive behavior, focus on incremental changes, one thing at a time. One feedback meeting, one topic. One specific topic. Strategy number 6. This is hard for people who are nice. And I'm guessing that's probably most of you, because really, it's most people. Most people are nice. We don't want to go around saying mean things to other people. We don't want to say things that may upset other people. We don't want to do things that may upset other people. I would encourage you to step away from the idea of being nice and focus on being kind, because it is kind to tell somebody when their behavior is harmful. It may not feel great to them in the moment, but it is a kind thing for them, and it will help them to grow and help them to build their own career. So, to do that, when you have hard feedback to give, you have to let it land. You have to say it, look at the person, and then stop. It will feel awful. It will feel awkward, and it will feel difficult, and you will want to fill the silence while the person sits there and digests the hard thing that you just said to them. Do not try to soften the feedback. Do not say, I gave this example earlier, boy, you interrupted so-and-so 14 times in that meeting, but I'm sure you didn't mean it, it's okay. Also, you did the other things really, really well. And can we talk about how great you were in this thing the other day in your demo? It just was like you move on so fast because you don't want to focus on that hard moment. But sit with that. I don't like the compliment sandwich. And this is an opinion with a capital O, so take it as you will. But I don't believe it's effective because I believe that it detracts. Actually, I'm going to rewind really quick. And if you're not familiar with this idea, it's you give somebody one good piece of feedback, and then one negative piece of feedback, and then another good piece of feedback. So like the negativity is like sandwiched in between the good stuff. I don't think that's valuable. I think that it's not respectful to the other person and their ability to deal with difficult feedback. And I think that it lessens the impact of that challenging feedback. So I encourage you to say it, let it land, and then wait for a response. This is important in teams, particularly in flat teams like ours where there is no manager to kind of handle disputes, but in all teams. Peer feedback should be collaborative. Unsolicited feedback is really hard for a lot of people to deal with. If somebody just walks up to me out of the blue and says, hey, in that demo, this wasn't so great, and I think that we should have probably done this differently, and da-da-da-da-da-da, when I'm still like coming down from, oh my God, I just presented in front of 3 clients and I still think I might vomit, that's not a good time for feedback for me personally. It's much better if we go back to the office and we sit down and I have a little time to process, and then we talk about, okay, how could that demo have been better? How could I have presented better? So, if you have constructive feedback to give somebody and it's not mission critical, ask. Say, hey, are you open to receiving some feedback about X? If they say yes, and I find that most of the time people will say yes, great. If they say no, that has to be okay too. If they say no and that feedback does need to be delivered, you can negotiate. Say, okay, how about another time? Or how about I email you? I do one-on-one meetings with all of our apprentices every week. And some of them are fine with me delivering critical feedback in the meeting, and some of them prefer that I email them the critical feedback the day before, and then they have some time to kind of think about it, and they come in and we talk about it in the meeting the next day. And I am fine with that, because that works for them, and we have a more productive conversation. Talk to your teammates. See how people prefer to receive feedback. Now, if they tell you that they would like your feedback 3 years from now and delivered by carrier pigeon, you're going to have a different set of issues. But if the request is reasonable, work together. Confirm understanding. I talked about this. When you give somebody feedback, say, hey, just so I made sure that I communicated what I meant to, what did you just hear me say? And then follow up. If you tell someone on your team, hey, I need you to speak up more in meetings, and the next meeting that you go to, they do, pat them on the back. Say, I noticed. I saw you make an effort. I really appreciated it. Good job. These are anti-patterns in feedback. Don't do these. Focus on behavior, not on character. Do not say, you are such a jerk in meetings. Remember, most of us are probably not jerks at all. You can say, you interrupted your colleague 3 times in that meeting. Behavior, not character. No retribution. A person cannot feel like they're going to be punished for giving feedback, or they will never give it. Don't give constructive feedback in public. The rule that we tend to follow is we praise in public and we critique in private. It's respectful, and it increases the likelihood that the other person is going to listen to what you have to say and not be completely focused on how embarrassed they are that you're calling them out in front of an entire room full of people. All right, this is a sometimes unpopular opinion. I believe that anonymous feedback does the opposite of creating trust and fostering strong team relationships. There is a component of maturity in being responsible for what you say to somebody else. I have found in my experience that anonymous feedback tends to build resentment in teams, tends to erode trust, and lets people grind axes, because sometimes, let's face it, we all want to do that. In cases where trust is already established, anonymous feedback can work. In cases where there's a power differential, like you giving feedback to your boss, anonymous feedback may be essential. But I would say, don't use it unless you have to. Lead by example. Good feedback culture starts with leadership. And your team notices what you model. If you are a tech lead, if you are a manager, if you are in charge of other people, even if you're just a senior developer and you have people that are more junior than you on your team, they are looking at you and they are doing what you do. And that applies to feedback too. If when you have a problem with somebody, you go and complain to somebody else in the team about it, but you never actually talk to that person directly, everyone who's looking at you as a model is going to do that exact same thing. You as a team can create proactive steps. Build in regular one-on-ones. Build in structured peer feedback. That can look different for any team. Build in retros for your team. And use that structure as scaffolding. In an ideal world, feedback happens every day, in the moment, just constantly. You have a little exchange and somebody says something that's not quite the right thing and you go, oh, hey, that wasn't super cool. Maybe don't say that again. That was hurtful. And they go, oh, sorry. And you move on and you go back to the code. That's the ideal. Feedback should just happen. We use the structures to get us comfortable enough and to give us enough practice that that eventually can happen. And last, number 10, practice. This stuff is hard. It is still hard for me, and I have practiced every day for the last 3 years. Practice with a teammate or a friend. Maybe get together with a teammate and say, hey, I want to get better at giving feedback. Do you? Great. You want to practice together? You want to work on this with each other? You want to give each other positive and constructive feedback and see how it feels? Find a mentor. Ask a colleague who is really good at this stuff, hey, I feel like you're really good at giving and receiving feedback. Would you be willing to kind of coach me on this? Ask your boss, even a professional coach. Get together a group of colleagues and figure out a peer feedback system that'll work for your team. Or figure out one to try and then decide if it works or not and then try something else. You can even organize or ask for a feedback training for your entire team. I go through this feedback survey, and this is a self-survey, about once every 3 months. And I ask myself each of these questions, and I'm not going to go through them now because I'm running low on time, but it's here for you and my slides will be available at the end. I go through and I ask myself these questions and I assess, how am I currently doing on my ability to give and receive multiple kinds of feedback? And if I'm not doing as well as I want to, which is almost always, what can I do to improve? And I have some specific takeaways for you today. When you go home, back to work on Monday, here are some things you can try to build your feedback skills. Pick a teammate that you think did something great recently and give them specific, thoughtful, positive feedback. Affirmative feedback is way less scary than constructive feedback, so start there. Ask a teammate or your boss to tell you one thing that you do well and one thing you do better. I suggest asking for this by email. It gives the other person time to think about their response, and it'll let you react in private and kind of go back and review the feedback in the future. This is something that we do at work. Make a thanks Slack channel. So whenever somebody does something great in the team, you can acknowledge them in front of everybody else. And last, this is a bonus because this is a hard one. Start a conversation with your team. Say, hey, how do you think we're doing? How could we get better? I have a couple of resources up here. These are books that I really love. And I am really, really out of time. So if you have questions for me, that's my dog. She's super cute, right? Find me on Twitter. please email me. I would love to hear your stories. I would love to hear your feedback on my talk. I promise to say thank you. I'd love to learn about your experiences and discuss any questions that you have. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thanks CraftCon for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Erika. I have a feedback for you. We are really, really out of time, so you should say thank you now. And we have time only for 2 questions maximum, and then Erika will be right here to answer all of your questions offline.
Okay, should I just start at the top? Oh, okay. How do you motivate people to give feedback? Okay, great question. I just gave a whole talk that I hope is motivating you to get better at giving and receiving feedback. You can take all of these strategies and apply them to your teammates. Say, hey, giving feedback and receiving feedback is how we get better as a team. It's how we do better work. It's how we make more money. It's how we grow in our careers. All of those things. Those are great motivators. All right, how do we communicate the hard stuff? We talked a little bit about this in here. Number 1, focus on behavior. Do not focus on character. Do not judge the person. You did a bad thing is very different from you are a bad person. This particular example is really challenging, but I have done this. I have actually had to deliver this exact feedback, and it was embarrassing for me, and it was embarrassing for them, and it was not fun, but we had the conversation, and we never had it again. And they came to me a few weeks later and said, you know what? Thanks for saying that, because boy, you saying that to me directly is a lot better than my entire team talking behind my back for however, who knows how long until somebody said something.
Okay, one more.
Okay. How to introduce feedback-giving culture in a team. What should be taken into consideration in multicultural teams? Ooh, good. I don't want to speak to all teams because you know your team the best. Hopefully you already know some ways that your team works, but I would say the best way to do this is to listen. Go through that feedback survey with your team. Have everybody talk about how they feel about feedback, how giving and receiving the different kinds of feedback makes them feel, how they would prefer to receive feedback. Would they rather have it in writing? Would they rather have it in person? Things like that. Any specific concerns that any kind of person has. Like, I really don't like it when my boss says, hey, I need to talk to you. Can we meet in a week? I panic for that entire week. I hate that vagueness. So he knows that, so he doesn't do that to me anymore. Okay? So you listen. You get together and you talk and you say, what's going to work for us?
Thank you. Truly fearless, Erika. Round of applause.
Thank you.